Probably my proudest moment when I was a young adult was the very first time that I signed my name on the lease of a home that I was renting out with two of my friends, James and Andrea. The three of us had known each other since we were children, so we had always planned on living together, but to actually have it happen was very exciting. That excitement quickly faded though, as things in that house started out really strange, and we realized that particular home wasn't one that we could live in. The first night that we moved in was pretty normal for the most part. The only strange thing that happened was right before I went to bed. It was about 12:30 or 1 in the morning at that point, and after doing some unpacking I decided to shower, have a quick snack and get to bed. As I was showering, I could have sworn I heard a tapping noise coming from the other side of the bathroom wall, which would have been on the outside of the house. But I just equated the noise to a small leak behind the wall that was coming from the pipe leading to the shower, so I didn't pay it any mind. After I was all done in the bathroom, I went into the kitchen to grab a snack, and as I made my way down the hallway, I heard that tapping noise again as if it was following me. But again, for this to happen, the tapping would have had to come from outside of the house. That time I decided to check it out. So before grabbing a snack, I put my shoes on and ran outside to check around the house to see if there was anything that would be making a tapping noise. Now, it was pretty dark outside, and the lights we had on our house weren't the brightest, so I couldn't see much. But from what I could tell, there was no one there, so I went back inside, locked the door, and then finished what I was doing before going to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and went into the kitchen for coffee, and Andrea surprised me when she asked if I'd heard any weird noises coming from outside that last night. I told her that I heard a tapping noise, but what she had heard was totally different. She said that about 3 in the morning, there was a guttural howling noise that sounded like it was coming from the woods on the other side of our backyard. We talked with James about the different things we had heard, but he said that he was passed out by the time anything happened and didn't hear a thing. And honestly, I think he didn't believe us at first. Sadly, he learned firsthand that neither of us was crazy. After work that day, we all decided to finish unpacking together and ordered a pizza to celebrate. And when the delivery guy got to the house, he surprised us all when he asked me a very strange question. "Have you heard the noises yet?" he asked, which caught me off guard. I shook my head in confusion before asking him what he meant by that, and apparently, he was close to the woman who lived in the house before us. And he claimed that on her first few nights in the house, she said that there were strange noises coming from the woods. The three of us were shocked by what we were hearing, and James was convinced that we tipped the delivery driver extra to tell the story. That wasn't the case though, and that night we all heard what we could only assume the old resident had been supposedly hearing. It started at around 11:30 that night, a little earlier than it did on the previous night. But this time we were all sitting on the couch getting ready to head into our respective rooms when there it was, that strange tapping noise on the walls. This time it sounded like it was coming from the wall toward the back of the house. James's eyes widened as he realized that I wasn't lying, and there was a chance that Andrea was telling the truth as well. The three of us didn't waste much time deciding that we should go outside and check out the sound. James and Andrea decided to go out the front door, and I told them that I would go out by the side door near the kitchen so that way we could see if anyone tried to run away. And boy, do I wish that was the case. I made it outside and to around the side of the house before James and Andrea could get there, and I was shocked when I saw what looked like a malnourished, dirt-covered man tapping neurotically on the side of our house. Just as I was about to say something, James and Andrea came around from the other side and alerted the strange man who looked up at them. Once he realized that they were there, he turned to run away, not realizing that I was standing behind him. He stopped in his tracks when he saw me, and that was when it looked like his fear turned to anger. He locked eyes with me and let out a guttural scream that was so loud I could hardly hear James telling me and Andrea to run as he shoved the man from behind, knocking him to the ground. The three of us ran into the house and locked the doors before calling the police. By the time they came to the house, though, the man was gone. Thankfully, after giving them the description, they knew exactly who to look for. According to the officers, a neighbor that lived a few houses away from ours had an adult son who was in and out of the psych ward on a monthly basis for having psychotic episodes. They suspected that he was experiencing one and went over to their house and found him exactly as we had described, covered in dirt and appearing to be incoherent. Thankfully for us, we had time to back out of our lease before it was finalized and ended up finding a different house to rent together. The second place that my wife and I moved into happened to be the first actual house that we had rented. And compared to our old apartment, this place was a palace, even though there was only one bedroom. But that was all we needed, and even though the rent was a little bit high, we loved that place. The only issue that we ever ran into was over the course of the first 2 weeks that we lived there. The strangeness actually started happening the night before our first night in that house. You see, before officially moving in, we were able to get the keys from the realtor and move most of our boxes in the day before. That way, the morning when we got there, we only had to show up with a few essentials, and the rest of our stuff was ready to be unpacked. However, when we showed up that morning, we were both surprised to see that some of the boxes looked like they had been opened. We called the realtor and asked if anyone had come by the house, and she assured us that it wouldn't have been possible. We decided to just pass it off as something that must have happened when we dropped the boxes off the previous day and just decided to move on. I wish we had thought about it a little more though, because in hindsight it was really clear that someone had gone through our stuff, but there's no going back now. That day we unpacked everything that we had, and it wasn't much, which was fine because the house actually came fully furnished. And that night before going to bed, I remember locking the front door, though the following morning it would look as though I hadn't. After waking up, my wife and I were surprised to see that some of the things in the kitchen had been moved around. At first, I thought that she had gotten up and had a late night snack, but when she accused me of doing that very same thing, I knew it couldn't be the case. I assured her that I didn't, but neither of us could figure out why the toaster had been moved, and it looked like there were breadcrumbs all over the counter. But once neither of us confessed to making some toast in the middle of the night, the best thing to do was to just move on. Although again, I wish we had questioned it a bit more. Over the next week, things like that kept happening, and by that point, my wife and I were certain that it wasn't either of us doing it, so I decided to finally cave and get a small camera from Walmart and place it where it can both see the living room and the kitchen. And what we captured shocked both of us. It was about 2:15 in the morning when I woke up to a notification noise on my phone, and when I looked, it was from the app that the camera hooked up to saying, "Movement detected." I touched the fingerprint scanner on my phone to unlock it, and when the camera opened up, my heart all but stopped. Standing right in the middle of the living room, I could see a man who looked like he was heading toward the kitchen. I could see that he came in from the front door because it was still wide open, so I decided to calmly wake my wife up, and before showing her the phone, I told her to stay quiet so that the man who broke in didn't realize we were awake. After quietly explaining to her that someone was in the house, I called the police and told the dispatcher what was going on in as low of a whisper as I could manage. As we waited for the police to show up, my wife and I watched the camera and were absolutely stunned by how comfortable the person looked in our home as he helped himself to our food in the kitchen. The police got to our house a few moments later, and the man noticed the flashing lights as they pulled into the driveway and decided to try to run out of the back door. And again, he ran through the house as if he had mapped the place out. He knew that the other door was down the hallway. Thankfully, the police thought that might happen there, and as 2 officers came in the front door, 2 more were waiting outside and managed to catch him. It turned out to be the previous tenant who was renting the place out and had actually gotten evicted before we moved in. Apparently, he was homeless and had held onto the key to the house and used it to break in and steal a meal every night that we lived there. He even admitted to sleeping in the house for 2 weeks before we actually moved in. So, if I can tell you one thing, it's to always change the locks when you move into a new place. After graduating from NYU, I decided to move to Pennsylvania for work and a bit of a change of pace. The place I moved to was very rural compared to what I was used to, and right away I thought that the people were nicer. I mean, I didn't even have to introduce myself to the neighbor before he and his son offered to help me get some of the heavier stuff out of the truck. You see, it was just me and my mom driving the truck with all my stuff, so when they offered to help, we really appreciated it. The older man and my mom started bonding over me because the man said that I reminded him of his daughter, who had moved away a few years ago. Meanwhile, I mainly focused on making sure that I got everything out of the truck and in the right rooms, and when we were finally finished, I thanked Roger and his son Dylan for helping move my stuff and for lending us a hand with assembling the bed, but they said it wasn't a problem and then let me know that if I ever needed anything, to just call, before leaving their number on the counter. My mom stayed for a few hours and helped me unpack some boxes, and by the time she left, it was already dark out. I have to admit, it was a little weird being on my own for the first time, but for some reason, I didn't feel scared at all, at least not at first. It wasn't until around 10 that night that my mood started to take a serious turn. I was watching some Survivor on TV and just enjoying having an entire place to myself when I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye near the window. I froze in place as I looked toward the window that led to the front yard, but I couldn't see anything because of how dark it was compared to the inside. I decided to get up and close the curtains just to be safe, but from that point on, I couldn't shake the feeling like no matter where I went to my house, something was watching me. It got to the point where I even called my parents to help calm myself down, and after having them tell me that it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me, I finally managed to shake the feeling. However, I stayed on the phone with my mom for way too long, and by the time I hung up, I realized how tired I was and figured that it was time for me to go to bed. I did my usual nighttime routine and grabbed a glass of water before heading into my room, and by that point, I had forgotten the entire incident from earlier that night and didn't even think to close my blinds. To this day, that's a decision I regret and something I will never neglect to do again. It wasn't long after laying down that I let myself drift off to sleep, but I hadn't quite gotten there when something made my eyes shoot open. I could hear the clear sound of things crunching on the ground outside of my window, and before I could turn all the way around in my bed to face it, I saw a bright flash. I screamed as loud as I could as I realized that someone had just taken my picture from outside my window, and as I got quiet, I could hear the sound of them running away. I grabbed my phone and ran over to the window. Once I got there, I tossed it open and shined my flashlight out into my yard, and though I could hardly see it, I could just make out what looked like the silhouette of someone running toward my neighbor's house. I immediately called my parents and the police, who both came to my house as fast as they could. Even though we didn't have clear evidence as to who was outside of my window taking pictures of me, the police still went to talk to my neighbors, and when they did, they apparently spoke to the son, Dylan, who didn't realize that his dad was in trouble and let it slip that he had just gotten home, even though Roger had told the officers that he had been inside the entire night. After questioning Roger a bit more, he finally admitted to watching me through my window, and when he thought I was asleep, he decided to take a picture of me, not realizing that his flash was on. Roger got in trouble, but when I realized that he only got a small fine, I figured that my safest option was to move back in with my parents until I could find a better place to live.